I think that our experience here in the United States is that this embrace of, and I hate to call it traditional marriage, I would like to say the truth of marriage, attracts people from different faith communities and some from no faith community at all. So I think that there is a coalition, and we also find that we need to join together because separated from one another, um, we're not as strong.
Dominic Lombardi, a very warm welcome to the Coalition for Marriage. I just want to place where you are so people understand, not just geographically. In fact, you're in Washington, and we met together recently, which was a wonderful joy for me, and perhaps we can talk about that. But you also you're an executive director for something called the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Now, do you want to tell people in the UK who maybe don't understand what that is, exactly what that is, and how big that is?
Well, this actually throughout the world, the Catholic Church has conferences in countries that unite all of the bishops in pastoral and doctrinal matters. And so I'm sure you have it in the United Kingdom. There's a conference of Catholic bishops here in the United States. We're one of the larger conferences. We serve, I think, 197 dioceses throughout the United States and eparchies. I think if we add the eparchies, it's over 200. And it's a coordinated action and resource of the bishops in service of both the national church and the universal church and the local church.
Yeah.
And the particular area that I serve as an executive director is it's a bit of an alphabet soup: laity, marriage, family life, and youth. But it's really the apostolate of the laity, our lives in the world, in witness to the gospel, and forming in the community of the church, even at the parish level, and then to the most fundamental level, that of the family.
Which is exactly why I'm so happy to be talking to you. And our supporters in the UK, we've got tens of thousands of supporters of Man, Woman, and Marriage. They come from all faiths and none, but honestly, Dominic, most of them are Christians, and of those, a great many will be Catholics, like yourself. And so it is a joy to talk to you from that perspective. How many Catholics approximately would you have in the US?
There's, say, 325 million people.
Yeah.
About a quarter of which are baptized Catholics.
Right.
Not all of them identify
Ooh.
these as Catholics, but
Yeah.
that's about the broad number.
Yeah. I mean, that's way more people than we have in our country. So, I mean, that's, it's a significant portion of people for whom you are the executive director of what the church sees as the church's opinion around these important issues. So that's quite something. And I'm interested in a couple of things to talk to you about. First of all, the changes which have happened in America quite recently, especially vis-a-vis trans-identified people and children. And I believe that your group have issued a statement which has kind of backed up some of the changes that have been made, and saying, well, actually, we agree that there are only two sexes and that's important for human dignity. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
This ideology of gender ideology, the notion that gender is detached from our biological sex, has been something percolating really for some time now, actually. So I'm sure there's a whole history to this, but especially in the last decade, the fact that it's kind of entered into policy and educational structures and even into the family, and debates and fights about the authority of parents in regards to their children. Um, in certain places, in states, for instance, the notion that they're safe havens so that a child who has gender dysphoria or gender confusion, they would even take a child away from their parents to another state to have this transition surgery or therapies and so forth. And the notion that this would be the best way to help young people with their confusion about their identities. has had a tremendous impact upon young people, those who have had these surgeries or had these therapies. Um, there's been a kind of movement, though, against this building, though even under the previous administration, the Biden administration in the United States, there was a strong push by the Biden administration uh, to push this gender ideology into all corners of the public sphere and even into the family. So, so this has been going on for some time. The Church of the United States has been speaking to it. The executive order by President Trump outlawing the federal funding and proposal of gender ideology in general and gender transition for young people in specific represents a kind of crystallized moment in terms of the church's voice, what it has been saying actually over the past decade even, and then more frequently over the past 5 years, and then in this current situation that we find ourselves in. You know, the common sense notion, you know, that our biological sex is who we are, is our identity. Even though there's a broad spectrum of how that, of personalities and how that's lived out, but it's the foundation. And in Dignitas Infinita, Pope Francis notes this as it's accepting the gift of our sexuality. It's a gift from God to serve Him as men and women in the world. And that is the only way that we will be happy. And to deny our identities as male and female leads to profound sadness. And I would even say, in some respects, is a kind of demonic reality. So, so I think the stakes are very high. This is a particular moment in which the church, I'm thankful, and I can help serve, teach about this fundamental reality that we're made in God's image and likeness, that we have this fundamental dignity, and that male and femaleness are part of the Imago Dei, how we are like God. That's how profound it is.
Yeah, and it's important that the church or the members of the church, the people in the church, understand that and are taught that, and don't just wander down the same direction as the world, thinking, oh well, if that's what I'm being told, it must be so, because it's not so.
True, and you can see the disquiet in people's lives, and so the idea that we can, another kind of reality behind this is this idea of autonomy in Western civilization these days, that I define myself in isolation from all other people. And I am just a kind of, I'm cut off, as it were, from a community. And that cannot lead to happiness in people's lives. And it actually reinforces the confusion and the difficulties that young people are having. You add on to that some of the abuses and some of the negative aspects of social media. And we see the mental health crisis, which I suspect is also present in the United Kingdom as it is in the United States, where many young people, and by the way, to be a young person means to be hopeful, you know, by nature, you know, and but now we find so many of our young people clouded by sadness and fear and doubt about their identities. That's telling us something about where our culture is, and only our relationship with God, with other people in the church community, in service to our neighbors, can we be happy. And again, male and femaleness is fundamental to that happiness.
And we've had, just like yourselves, exponential increase in these things over the last decade or more. When with the proliferation of social media, not only that, but the kind of what we would call the long march through the institutions in our state organizations, especially in our schools, and the sorts of things which are being, and we know that children's minds are malleable, and when they hear things, well, they adopt them and they assume them. You know, in fact, there's a proverb that you will know well, train a child up in the way they should go, and when they are older, they will not depart from it. And that's why we need to be very careful what we teach our young children, because they will just assume things. You know, they believe in fairies. They believe in Father Christmas. Not to dispel true. Anybody watching, but you know, they're very easy to believe in all these sorts of things that they come across. So we need to be very careful.
And I think that you're making a connection in my mind of the connection of the health and well-being of young people, the future of our society, which rests with them, and the role of the family, that it's in the deep relationships of family life where young people are formed. And I think that the disarray of young people is also connected to the disarray of family, to the loss of the understanding of what family is,
Yep.
of why fathers and mothers are so crucial and are irreplaceable. So I think these issues are all tied into that reality. And you might say that a healthy family life, by its very nature, provides that foundation. And I think the phrases that we've heard in the Catholic Church, the idea of a culture of life, a civilization of love, those that is what the family does and provides for not just the church, but for the wider society.
And I think you were very clear when we met. We had a wonderful conversation about the Catholic Church's view on family and on marriage being has to be between a man and a woman. Marriage describes that thing which only a man and a woman can do. So while other things may well take place in a liberal democracy outside of the church, there can't be marriage because marriage describes a thing that only a man and a woman can do. Yet nevertheless, in the US, just like the UK, fewer and fewer people are getting married, more children are born outside of marriage, and those who are getting married later in life and having fewer children, and there's a massive demographic crisis, etc., etc. And that's affecting the church as well as outside the church. And so I'm wondering, what do we do? What's the solution to that? I mean, you and I would realise that actually good families produce good societies, and there are so many benefits of all the things that comprise a family, all sorts of things, premarital chastity, monogamy, all sorts of things which lead to a healthier society, a more productive workforce, etc., etc. How do you, if you like, because I guess the buck kind of stops with you as the executive director of these things for, between 70 and 100 million people. What are you going to do about it?
First of all, I want to point to Pope Francis's Jubilee year, the Jubilee of Hope, and the Bull of Induction. I would recommend that all Catholics read that particular document. It came out in 2024 in preparation for the Jubilee Year of Hope. And in there, he talks about young people, and he exhorts them to make the commitment to get married and to have children, because children are the most concrete manifestation of hope. And so when you talk about young people being unhappy or uncertain about their life journey and holding off on getting married till later and later, or not getting married at all. And then, of course, if you take the profile of a married couple with children and the protection and the benefits that provides, as opposed to primarily single women raising children on their own, those are vastly different worlds in terms of the well-being of those children. Not to say that individual people are not doing heroic and beautiful work, raising their children even outside of marriage, but in the broad brush. And so I think that these are sort of signs of hope, signs of fruitfulness, this openness to children, the willingness to, how shall I put it? It's not the risk of marriage, it's the adventure of marriage. It's the beauty of persons, the inestimable beauty of persons. My wife, Melanie, and I were married a little bit later in life, so we probably were part of that demographic. It took us a little time to kind of figure out our vocations. But when we got married, we had children early in our marriage, as opposed to waiting. Well, we're not ready for children yet. Well, you probably are ready, frankly, And the longer you wait, the harder it is, frankly, to be honest with you. But each family, each couple has a faith story to tell, a story of fruitfulness if you open yourself up to God's plans. And we prayed all along the way to do God's will, to be open to the adventure of family life that He was going to propose for us. And that was our journey. Others' journeys are, who maybe experience infertility, are to adopt children or to be foster parents. There's so many ways, right? And then families need one another. So to be a community of families is essential, I think, in terms of supporting ourselves in this mission of raising our kids, where we strengthen each other in that journey.
I've got a couple of questions. One is, and of course, you, like ourselves, aren't necessarily as an organization politically inclined following one party or another. It's more policy based, the policies that propose and support what you agree with. I get that. But in many ways now, and I get not in all ways, but in the ways that concern my organization anyway, you're pushing on an open door. Whereas up till now, you would not have been doing so, and it would have been, almost combative, let's say, in terms of the policies you'll be pushing. How has that changed your work? Have you even managed to adapt to that yet?
I think since the uh, political battles around same-sex marriage, uh, I have followed and been part of that experience um, for the past 20 years. And I can remember in the archdiocese I served at that time, we had a annual anniversary mass for couples who were married 25 and 50 years. And I remember one year was in the state of Pennsylvania, we were advocating for man-woman marriage not to be changed legally. Um, and so that the auxiliary bishop at the time, God rest his soul, Bishop McGinnis, he was the celebrant of that mass. And so he spoke a little bit about the dignity of marriage and the importance of male and female and the meaning of what that means in God's plan for marriage. And I remember after the mass, people at that mass, either their families or the couples themselves, there were those who were very heartened by the message and others who complained about it. This idea of the exclusivity of marriage to this reality. And so I think there's a misunderstanding of, equality, for instance, and what that means. Whereas the reality is that difference matters, right? There's an exclusivity that matters. And that's hard for our people to understand because it's based upon the gifts that God has given us. It's not based upon a notion of equality that doesn't account for that difference, that fundamental difference. And so it's been a long slog, even within our community, in terms of our Catholic people understanding that reality. And so our catechesis has to kind of begin for our young people who would then experience it in the marriages of their parents, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who experience it in their search for a spouse and being open to the gift of marriage. So that reality will help them bear witness to this false notion of equality that has been proposed upon us, but it's really destructive.
I mean, I have to say, I have the privilege of meeting thousands of our supporters up and down the country, and I would say, and I might get into trouble for saying this, but our Catholic supporters are generally much more active and open about their support of man-woman marriage and being anti anything that isn't that than our Protestant supporters. Yeah, and much more vocal. I'm just wondering why that is. I wonder, and is there anything we can do to encourage all supporters of man-woman marriage to speak out and stand up and be counted?
I think that our experience here in the United States is that this embrace of, and I hate to call it traditional marriage, I would like to say the truth of marriage, attracts people from different faith communities and some from no faith community at all. So I think that there is a coalition, and we also find that we need to join together because separated from one another, we're not as strong. But the resources, the insights, even our meeting together, last week, our conversation today, the reality of this truth pulls people together into a coalition of witnesses and believers and advocates. Also, there's the whole sociological dimension. There's the data. The natural law is on our side. And so that's also another way to make our case to people.
which is exactly what we do. And oddly enough, Coalition for Marriage, what a good name. but you're quite right. And that's it. We draw on the secular evidence base, because while people may not be able to say, well, we don't believe your book, well, look at your own book. Look at the scientific research, and actually it's quite clear that this is the best way to bring about the best version of the next generation. And in the UK, I get for those who say, well, in a civil society, actually, which is pluralistic, why shouldn't we have something? Well, we had civil partnership. So we had something which gave people the exact same rights and obligations and duties and responsibilities and benefits. So they had that. But they wanted they wanted marriage. They wanted that thing. It was almost like, well, no, we need to redefine that thing so it's not what you say it is. And
there are quote unquote same-sex couples who actually acknowledge that, who say it's not this. Our relationship is not the same as my parents or my brother or sister. There are those voices, but they're very hard to be heard because the people in their world would not permit them to speak. The idea of erasing people is also a reality that we have here in the United States. Perhaps the recent changes that are afoot here in the United States will mitigate that somewhat. But the idea of just erasing people because of a perspective about traditional marriage is also a reality here in our culture.
And even as people in the church, recognizing that there but for the grace of God go any of us, right? And that our duty is to speak and uphold the truth, but do so in a loving, friendly manner. And we seem to get one of those wrong. Either we don't love and uphold the truth, or we don't do it in a graceful manner. And we need to maybe look at those things.
Indeed. And I think that, this is another part of marriage and family life ministry. The defense of traditional marriage is one aspect of it. The ministering to the wounded in the world who are victims of our culture and its inability to support marriage, so that, for instance, whether it be these areas or, for instance, the area of divorce, for instance, that's another significant ministry. And so to try to save marriages is important. To help young people who have been in divorced families is another very crucial, because their woundedness impacts upon them in terms of their own search for happiness in life. So it's a very multifaceted ministry.
It's quite a thing, and quite a role you've got. And I love the idea that as one of your former presidents said, we're the people we've been waiting for. Well, no one else is coming. We need to set that example for our children. And the church especially has got an obligation to show how good marriage is. Dominic, I can hardly fathom the potential impact in your role that you can have on so many tens of millions of people and families in the US. I honestly wish you all the best in everything that you're doing, and hope that God blesses it richly for the sake of families and everything that's happening in your country. And I'm so grateful
Tony,
for the time to talk to you.
And likewise for your work in the United Kingdom, Great Britain, the British Isles. God bless you.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.